All right. Welcome, Jimeca. We're just about to get started. I want to welcome everyone to the 6th webinar in our series. These sessions are brought to you by the Northwestern Community Services Board Prevention Department, and we're so excited to be back with you. We rescheduled after the nationwide Zoom outage last week, so it's good to be here. Today we're hosting our first panel, and we're talking solutions to the opioid epidemic. Just a couple of housekeeping things before we get started. Participants will be muted and your video will be turned off, and we ask that you remain this way. And also I want to invite you to ask your questions in the chat throughout this conversation today. If any questions come up for you, feel free to send those in the chat. We will address them at the end. If you don't feel like submitting your question to everyone, you can go ahead and send it to me directly in the chat, and I'll share it without your name attached to it. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our guests. Today we have Megan from Page Alliance for Community Action. We have Jimeca, who serves as a peer specialist, and Lauren from the Northern Shenandoah Valley Substance Abuse Coalition. We're so excited to have all of you here with us. And even though I just briefly introduced you, I would love to ask our panelists to introduce yourselves, maybe share what organization you're with and what work you're doing in the community.
Excellent. Who do you want to start with?
Why don't you start, Lauren?
Okay, sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Lauren Cummings. I'm the Executive Director of the Northern Shenandoah Valley Substance Abuse Coalition here in Winchester. The coalition formed back in 2014, really in response to the overdose epidemic that we were seeing at that time. At that time, really between 2012 and 2013 is when our area started to see the increase in overdose deaths. We went from 1 overdose death in 2012 to 21 overdose deaths in 2013, and then it continued to climb from there. Law enforcement really led the effort in starting the coalition. It really was, they started tracking the overdose numbers and decided that they wanted to do something about it. So we convened in 2014, led by the chief of police at the time for the Winchester Police Department, Kevin Sanzenbacher. We had a first gathering, if you will, at Shenandoah University back in 2014, and we formed the coalition a month later. The coalition has a number of different individuals who are a part of it from a lot of different backgrounds. So law enforcement, health professionals, treatment providers, concerned community members, people in long-term recovery, folks who have lost loved ones to overdose, and we meet on a monthly basis. In 2016, we started the Northwest Regional Adult Drug Treatment Court that covers Winchester, Frederick, and Clark counties. We also have a partnership with Northwestern Community Services Board to provide peer services out in the community in a number of different capacities. And over the past year and a half, we've started a program called the Law Enforcement Overdose Intervention Program. And this is really targeted at getting individuals who are involved in the criminal justice system and are considered more moderate risk, if you will, into the treatment that they desperately need. We know that a lot of individuals are living with addiction and are not receiving treatment. And this is one way that we're able, through probation and parole, to identify individuals who don't have treatment options, and we are engaging them in treatment, an outpatient treatment program that we have here within our offices. I think that's all I'll start with right now.
Thanks, Lauren. Megan, do you want to go next?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Megan Gordon. I'm the Program Director with Page Alliance for Community Action. We are a substance misuse prevention coalition in Page County. The coalition was formed similar to what Lauren was saying in 2006. Actually, the school system headed up forming the coalition, just seeing a need in some data in the schools with the usage the uses of substances by our youth. So they partnered with Northwestern and our local law enforcement to start a substance misuse prevention coalition. On the coalition, we have parents, youth, youth serving agencies, Northwestern, the hospital, community businesses, media. We've got a wide array of sectors represented who all are very vested in doing what is best for our youth in Page County. So we focus not so much on the treatment and recovery side of things, but we focus on the prevention side with the youth on multiple substances, alcohol, tobacco, marijuana, and prescription drugs. So in 2015, we received some Drug-Free Communities grant funding that allowed us to grow our efforts in Page County. We work close with the school system and the sheriff's department to continue to decrease access to various substances and also increase patrols and checks to ensure that all of our retailers and businesses and youth and families are in compliance with everything. Everybody's staying safe and healthy. We're very excited about the things that we have going on. The time of COVID and the pandemic things are becoming a little challenging. We're looking at moving a lot of stuff virtual. It's a little bit different trying to reach our youth. But what we do is really try to prevent use before it starts. So when we're talking about opioids today, we really try to work with our community partners to ensure that they have resources to make sure that they are monitoring, storing, and disposing of prescription medicines. We're really trying to focus on decreasing access in the home. We partner with local funeral homes, local assisted livings, just to make sure that unused prescription medicines are disposed of properly and they know how to store them properly. So it decreases access, particularly for the youth in the community.
Thanks, Megan. Jimeca?
Hello, everyone. I am Jimeca Iyomere. I am a certified peer recovery specialist and newly certified forensic peer support specialist with Northwestern Community Services Substance Use Disorder Program. So typically, if it were not for COVID, I'd be working out of the peer center where we provide lots of resources. We have, I think, 14 peers now that are working there. We do have a virtual peer center that is available right now so that people in the community can call in when they're struggling or need resources or just need someone to talk to. I also provide the peer perspective with Northwestern's crisis intervention team training. And I'm a NAMI Connection Support Group facilitator and also a mental health first aid instructor, working with our prevention department. Unfortunately, again, because of COVID, I have not had the opportunity to actually facilitate a training yet, but I'm looking forward to it whenever things start to open back up.
Great. Thank you all for sharing about your organizations. I would love to dig a little bit deeper and ask each of you, to the degree that you feel comfortable, to share what brought you specifically into this work. So maybe we can go in the same order. Lauren, if you want to start off.
I keep forgetting that mute button. Sorry about that. Absolutely. So in my previous life, I was a news anchor and reporter for about a decade. And so, my job was, following breaking news and covering stories about breaking news. I really enjoyed the crime beat, to be honest. So I did a lot with, folks being arrested. After that, I was the public information officer for the Winchester Police Department for 3.5 years. And in that role, I was responsible for posting, folks' mugshots to Facebook and the website who were wanted. And I started to notice a trend among these individuals who were committing these crimes. And the trend was that they were all motivated by addiction. We were seeing an increase at the time in shopliftings, an increase in larcenies from motor vehicles, and all of these crimes, credit card frauds, were motivated by addiction. And so I got sort of tired of posting these pictures and wanted to know more. I knew that these individuals from my previous life, right, had a story. I was used to telling stories as a news reporter and anchor, and knew that there was more to the crimes that were being committed than just what we were seeing on the face of it. And so really, when the efforts began in our community to address the addiction epidemic that we were seeing back in 2014, the chief of police called me and he said, as the public information officer, he said, hey, there's this event going on over at Shenandoah University today. If you have a chance to stop by, maybe you should. And I did. And I became very interested in this work and learning more about individuals who were living with addiction. And so when the position opened up for executive director of the coalition in 2016, I applied for the position and sort of transitioned over to this role and have really enjoyed it. You know, I think what I have found is that I am very compassionate about individuals who are living with addiction. None of us are immune from the disease. All of us have individuals in our families who are struggling, loved ones, friends. And so I really care about these folks and finding solutions to the epidemic, and then also just helping their families to cope with it as they're going through this. And so I enjoy reaching out to the community in that capacity.
So I worked prior to becoming the program director for PACA in 2015. I was a parent representative for 2 years on the coalition. I have 3 young adult children of my own, 17, 18, and 22. So I've been actively involved in the community in Page County since they were little. So, you know, for a very long time involved with a lot of the youth. I worked in the school system and then worked for the central office managing state and federal grants, which is how I became involved with PACA. And once we received DFC funding in 2015, I put in for the program director position because similar to what Lauren said, I had a passion for working with the kids, ensuring that they were going to stay safe and healthy. It just kind of seemed like a natural progression to me. And since then, it has been just a whirlwind of learning everything about prevention. You know, growing up in my house, it was very different than what it's like for my kids growing up. And I did that kind of intentionally because the more I learned about prevention and substance misuse and how early use affects later use, I knew that I wanted to make sure everybody knew the science behind addiction and the science behind prevention. And, you know, I just realized I had a passion to continue to educate everybody in the community and make sure not only my kids lived in a healthy, safe environment, but to ensure that all the kids, you know, I coached in the school system, I taught in the school system. So I, you know, have a passion to make sure all the kids in Page County are protected and safe and the parents are educated. And really, you know, I'm a firm believer in the full continuum of care, but prevention is key, early primary prevention. If we can stop this before it starts, it makes it a whole lot easier in the end. And I know that's not possible for everybody. That's why treatment and recovery, all of it has to go together. But you know, just starting to learn about prevention early, getting involved with PACA and understanding how important it is for communities to come together, work together, and work kind of from the bottom up. I like that system, that model, and you know, that's kind of how I got involved and sort of how it's been evolving.
Okay, my turn. So as a peer specialist, I'm actually a person who is living in recovery, a long-term recovery from drug and alcohol addiction. My addiction started at 8 years old with alcohol and progressed to narcotic pain pills and marijuana by the time I was 16, and to, you know, cocaine and ecstasy, which lots of times contains opioids, by the time I was 18. And it was a long road involving, you know, I had children. I started having children at a young age. I was 19 when I started having children. And there were a lot of consequences in my life from my addiction. And also I've been living with mental illness, severe mental illness, since I was young also, which a lot of times, we know plays hand in hand with addictions developing. And so my addictions and my mental illness led me to a point where I hit rock bottom, and I lost my kids to foster care, and I lived homeless and was just kind of living like a hopeless life. I was involved with, the court system, with the foster care system, and I was actually at one point declared incompetent by the courts. And so I reached a turning point in 2015, and that at the time that I reached that turning point, I kind of, realized that my struggles that I was having and everything that I had been through in relation to my addiction and my mental illness was something that could be used in my life for good, and that, I didn't have to just wallow in it for the rest of my life. And so, at that turning point, I started moving forward and started actually taking I had a lot of community help that I was not exactly accepting of before that point. I was kind of like the person who was like hiding under the couch and turning off all the lights when my mental health support was like knocking at my door. But once I reached that point, I started using all of that help, like 110%. And I started taking what I was getting from my supports and practicing it daily in my life. And it worked. And I was able to slowly but surely build my life back together and start using the skills that I was learning in treatment to advocate for myself and my children. And I was able to get my children back, and I started attending a lot of trainings, and that's how I eventually became a NAMI Connection Support Group facilitator. And that was like really my first exposure to people who were recovering or in recovery, actually helping other people. But once I figured out that that was a possibility, I just kind of moved full steam ahead from there and became a peer. And, this is, I feel like my calling on my life is to use my experiences. I feel like, I've been in some really ugly places, but those ugly places have made the beautiful place that I'm in now. And I can use that to show other people that they don't have to stay where they are. There is help available. You are your actual biggest resource. Your resilience that you have inside of you, all of us can build resilience. And once you start honing in on that and using it, you're your biggest resource, and you can actually move yourself out of that place. And so that's why I work as a peer.
Thanks, Jimeca, and thank you, Lauren and Megan. I love the people who do this work, because I think we all come to it in different ways, but it's really exciting to move forward in it together. And from here on out, I'm going to be asking questions that either one of you can answer, or you can all jump in and kind of discuss. But I'd love to start just by, as Lauren said, addiction has touched all of our lives in some way, whether it's ourselves or a family member, a friend. So we know that it's around us, but I'm hoping you can kind of speak to what addiction looks like in the Shenandoah Valley specifically, either trends you see or really anything. I don't know if one of you wants to start with that.
Sure, I can start. Today is International Overdose Awareness Day, and we remember the lives that we've lost to an overdose. This year in the Northern Shenandoah Valley, we've lost 39 individuals to a heroin or opioid overdose. And the Northern Shenandoah Valley includes Winchester, Frederick, Clark, Shenandoah, Page, and Warren. It is the region that is covered by the Northwest Virginia Regional Drug and Gang Task Force, as well as our health department. The Lord Fairfax Health District covers that area as well. In addition to the 39 individuals who have died, 134 individuals have suffered a non-fatal overdose this year in the region. And those numbers are way up. The highest point that we reached was in 2017 when our area hit 40 fatal overdoses. But behind those numbers, it's important to remember that there are individuals, there are families, there are children, there is a community, right, that is being impacted in some way by the loss of these lives. But just as every day there are individuals who are dying from drug overdoses, there are also individuals like Jimeca who are recovering. And so, Jimeca, thank you for sharing your story, because that is what folks need to hear. It's a story of hope. You have overcome and are continuing to overcome. Addiction is a chronic relapsing brain disease. We know that it sometimes means that individuals have to engage in treatment multiple times. So back to the original question, Casey, in the Northern Shenandoah Valley, I think that addiction looks a lot like it does across our country. We have seen a number of waves of the opioid epidemic. It started with prescription drugs, it moved to heroin, and then we are in the third wave, which is fentanyl. And many believe that a fourth wave is coming right now because of the pandemic that we're facing, the COVID-19 pandemic. What we typically see when we talk to individuals is very similar to Jimeca's story. I started out with alcohol at a very young age. We often hear 10, 11, 12 years old. It often progresses then to pills in some instances or to cocaine in other instances. Marijuana, obviously, so normally it's alcohol, marijuana, cocaine, or prescription drugs, and then prescription drugs often leads to heroin. But what we also see is that once an individual is at the point of using heroin, they typically say that they would use anything and have used anything, methamphetamine. We also see them meddling now with what's called scramble, which is a combination of cocaine and fentanyl, and it's coming in pill form. We have seen overdoses recently from scramble. And what we also see is not just the illegal drugs that are being misused, but we're also seeing things like kratom very often being misused. Kratom is a synthetic opioid that mimics the effects of opiates. And now we are seeing the impact on children in our district from babies being born from a mother who has used kratom, and they are now experiencing neonatal abstinence syndrome. So it goes beyond just the illegal drugs. Kratom is not a scheduled drug at this time. It's something that we're working on. But we also see misuse of prescription drugs that folks are prescribed for mental illness. Things like Wellbutrin and gabapentin are things that we see misused. So again, when someone is suffering, when they are dealing with a mental illness or an addiction, if they're dealing with trauma, right, that's the big word. When they're dealing with trauma, they don't discriminate in what they're using. They're going to use whatever they can to cope with that and to basically just try and feel better, right? Try and feel normal is what we often hear from individuals. So, this is something that we're working on all the time, increasing the amount of services in this community. And I think we realized a number of years ago, just like the work that Megan is doing, we have to move further upstream. We are trying to treat and react to individuals who are dying, but we also have to focus on preventing individuals from ever becoming addicted. And that starts with our children. It starts with our families. It starts with decreasing the amount of trauma and adverse childhood experiences.
Thanks, Lauren. Jimeca or Megan, do you want to add on to that, or I can move on to our next question?
I think Lauren did a great job of explaining it. I mean, that's pretty much what it looks like. The substances may be a little different in each area. In Page County, our amount of methamphetamine use might be a little higher than our amount of heroin use at this time, but it's still, the substances are being used for the same reason. And that's, the same answer we get when we talk to kids who are drinking, using a lot of alcohol, a lot of underage drinking. It's still the same thing. They're trying to either cope with a trauma, or they're coping with boredom. I was on a call on Friday, a webinar about, and they referenced kratom and some other legal substances that kids can use that I actually hadn't heard of before. And they're talking about what we're going to see 6, 9, 10 months down the road after the onset of all of this downtime from the pandemic for the kids, so much virtual learning. And the trauma that's happening right now just from the kids not being able to be social with each other, or the amount of trauma that's gone on in the home and they never get a break from that. What we're going to see in, a year with the amount of kids that could or could not be using substances to cope or to, to deal with boredom. So it's those kind of things that are concerning. Definitely need to get further upstream in the process of it all. But I think what Lauren said was spot on. We are all seeing the same thing, maybe a different substance, but definitely all the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Both of you mentioned, and Jimeca mentioned, the use of substances in youth. And so I'm wondering if you can kind of speak to, Coffee and Connection started as a webinar series for parents. So I'm hoping that you can kind of speak to, how do we talk to kids about opioids and addiction, and how do we, start those preventative measures early on?
I think just starting the conversations early, making sure parents know what to talk about. We live in this world every day, so I think when we talk about things, we know what we're talking about. But then when I'm surprised all the time when I go out and speak to a group of parents, or speak at a church or someplace where people might not be as much in this world as we are. Not everybody understands the terminology, understands even what opiate is, and understands how it how it binds to receptors in the brain. And there's a lot of people that don't understand that science, so maybe educating parents, grandparents, caregivers, so they can understand the science behind it, so then they can talk to the kids. Not so much so just say no because I said so to say no. That speech doesn't resonate, it doesn't work. But give the kids the information. They can get any amount of information they want at their fingertips, and get it. Typically, 8 years old, even younger kids have cell phones, they have access. Give them the right information, and that's going to start with giving the parents, the caregivers, the community the correct information, and then just have conversations early, have them often, and don't stop. We're starting to move into working with young adults, 18 to 20-year-olds, and finding out that the conversations have to continue. When kids turn 18, that doesn't mean they are, able to go out and drink and use substances. Obviously, the legal age is 21. The brain's developing till you're, in your mid to late 20s. The longer you wait, the better off it is for your future. Don't stop the conversations when you're sending them off to college, send them off to work, or sending them, they graduate high school. Start the conversations early. Start it with science. Let them know. They see every day things that happen. They can watch the news. They see what's going on. Let them know what can happen, and just be open and honest, and let them use that data to make their decisions. But definitely keep the conversations going.
I think that was really good, Megan. And just to add to that, I feel like the basis is trust, building trust with your children, that they feel that they can come to you and talk to you about things, and having openness in the conversation with your children. Coming from a kind of unique perspective of living in recovery, my children are part of my recovery network. They're part of my, my team, so to speak. So they know my story. Of course, age appropriately, I decide what I'm going to talk with. I have an 18-year-old, a 15-year-old, a 13-year-old, and a 10-year-old. So we talk about my experiences and the information that I give them. is age appropriate. What I expose them to, we watch videos of other people's recovery stories, because, I'm mom. And so, you know, yeah, we watch videos of other people's recovery stories. We watch prevention videos. I talk with them about our family history because, it's very typical for people who end up in addiction to have past experience in their family with people who have lived in addiction. And so my children all know that because of the mental illness in our family, because of the addiction history in our family, they are predisposed. And so we talk openly about that, what that means for them, what that means for how they need to make decisions differently, how they might be more affected or more easily affected than their peers. We have a plan. So for the teenagers, if you get in a situation where you're with someone and they're trying something or they're doing something, we have a plan. We have a list of people that they can reach out to if they feel like they're in trouble, or even if they've tried something and they feel like they need to talk to someone. It doesn't necessarily have to be me, or my husband. It can be, we have our pastor, we have their support, because a family living in recovery, like, it's not just me who's in recovery, it's my whole family that's in recovery. And so we have a very large support network, and my children have a list of people that they can reach out to that are in our support network, their own support network, if they get in a situation like that. And, we keep it very open and very non-judgmental, because, we know that for most children, there's just a point in time where they want to try things, or they get with their friends, peer pressure, all of that. But if you do get in that situation, I, as a parent who has been through it, want to make sure that you have people that you can go talk to that can help you figure out what to do next, even if it's not me.
The only thing I would add, Jimeca and Megan really covered everything, but the only thing I would add for parents is just being aware of your own behaviors. I have an 8-year-old and a 5-year-old, and so, we started at a very young age having conversations about this. And I remember one time it was one of those learning opportunities that my son walked up to me, and he was about 6 years old, and he said, "Mommy, I have a headache, I need the purple medicine." And he was referring to children's Motrin. But I thought to myself, wow, he's already asking. His coping for his headache was to ask for children's Motrin. And I said, no, we're not doing that. So we had a conversation around, what are some other things that you could do to help get rid of your headache? Do you think you could lay down for a few minutes? Maybe you're hungry, maybe you're thirsty. So we talked about alternatives to just going directly to medication. And my husband and I are also very aware of our behaviors in front of our children, even as simple as taking your vitamin, your daily vitamin. If your children are seeing you placing a pill in your mouth every day, what message are we sending them? If you go home on a Friday evening really stressed out about work and the first thing that you do is to have a glass of wine or to drink a beer, what message are you sending your children? So I think it's important, like they said, age-appropriate messages, be honest with your children, and also just realize that they will often mimic your behaviors. So being aware of what message you're sending to them is really important.
Yeah, thank you, all three of you, for each of those perspectives. As one of you mentioned earlier, and it was in our advertising for this, so everyone is probably aware that today is International Overdose Awareness Day. And the whole point of that is to remember and to raise awareness about overdose and to reduce the stigma of drug-related death. I'm hoping that you can kind of speak to the ways that stigma can prevent people from getting treatment or reaching out, and can sort of hinder either the prevention process or the healing process, the recovery process, all of that.
Yeah, so stigma definitely prevents individuals from reaching out for help because they're embarrassed or ashamed. And so it's really important that as a society, we send a message that we support individuals who are seeking recovery, and we support individuals who are struggling with addiction and mental health disorders. and that we are open to allowing them, or not even allowing them, but we are open to finding resources for them so that they are able to head down the road to recovery. You know, unfortunately, 1 in 10 individuals is living with addiction in our communities. I've heard as high as 1 in 7 individuals are living with addiction, but very few of those individuals are actually seeking treatment. And I always say, if this was any other disease, it would be completely unacceptable. If someone who had heart disease, 1 in 10 with heart disease, wasn't seeking treatment, it would be completely unacceptable. So we have to treat addiction just as we do any other disease, and mental illness just as we do any other disease, so that people feel that they can reach out for help when they need it.
I think, Lauren definitely hit the nail on the head. The stigma surrounding addiction can be debilitating for someone who is living in addiction. We stigmatize ourselves based on what we've learned, kind of what's been ingrained in us from society. And it is a disease. And like Lauren said, it's comparable to a physical ailment. It's the same thing. It's just where the disease is, that's different, or where the ailment is, that's different. And so a lot of times when I'm working with people as a peer, I do use those examples, like Lauren said, about someone with heart disease. I'll talk about when we talk about like Narcan. I compare to, if someone is having a heart attack, what do? We call 911, we perform life-saving measures, and then they get help for what the underlying cause of the heart attack was. And so, I'll let them know this is the same thing. Like, if you've received Narcan, that was the life-saving measure that needed to be performed at that time, and it was part of the treatment, and now we have to move on to the next phase of treatment. We have to figure out what the underlying cause is and how do we treat it. And so I think, pretty much just reiterating what Lauren said, this isn't something that people are making up in their heads. This is real, and we have to, a lot of peer work is kind of tearing down those stigmas. I go and tell my story to the CIT officers so that they can see an example of, I was that person that people would consider, like, I was the absentee deadbeat mom. I was severely mentally ill. I was addicted to drugs and alcohol. I was homeless. I was all of those things. But each person that I approach with, like, there's no lost causes. Everyone has the ability to recover. Everyone. There's no one that I ever meet that I'm like, oh, like, and I get to hear there's some stories that I'm like, they're like, oh gosh, this is going to be a lot of work. But when it comes down to it, that's what it is. It's work. You figure out what the problem is, and we find solutions. And other problem that we have in society, if someone's sick, we figure out what's causing the problem and we find solutions. So it's the same thing.
That's an excellent transition into my next question, because I do, a huge part of addressing stigma is expanding understanding in the broader community. So each of you are involved in really great organizations. So I'd love to hear from you, what are ways that community members can get involved? And specifically, what can we do right now in the midst of this pandemic?
So from our perspective, community members can get involved with continuing to ask for, we have prescription lock boxes, timer caps, disposal bags, making sure that they are monitoring, storing, and disposing of prescription opioids. And we have permanent drop boxes at our sheriff's department, ensuring that they clean out medicine cabinets, decrease access, doing any number of those things will at least help remove some of the substances. Also, if community members just keep talking about the problem, and keep asking the question why. We're trying to focus, we're working a lot with the schools, focusing on resiliency, building resiliency. Jimeca had referenced earlier that we are all resilient. We just need to help develop those skills. So we're really working with our school counselors, our school teachers, our administration, to not focus so much on the behaviors of the kids, but to start asking why. Why are these things happening? Let's dig down a little bit deeper. So as a community, definitely in Page County, and everywhere in the Northern Shenandoah Valley, we, just keep talking, keep asking why, keep digging deeper, and help each other. Be a community, be connected.
Yeah, I agree. The only thing I would add is also just be informed. Educate yourself and others around you about the disease of addiction. Have an understanding of it. It is such a complex disease with so many different tentacles, if you will. And so being informed, if you have a friend or family member who is living with addiction, reach out to them, check on them, ask them in a non-judgmental way if you can help. Reach out for help for them. And then also, especially right now, as we are all coping with this pandemic that we're facing, do your part to take care of yourself and those around you. Self-care is so incredibly important. Take time, meditation. There's so many studies that have been done on the benefits of meditation, exercising, giving your mind a break from technology and the cell phone and these sort of virtual meetings and those sorts of things. Just do your part to take care of yourselves and your family members and those around you. I always say we all have an obligation and a responsibility to ourselves and our family members. So just make sure you're checking in on folks and making sure that they're okay.
Yeah, I think Lauren and Megan, kind of covered that one. I feel like education is key for community members.
Oh, Jimeca, I think you got muted.
There we go. Understanding how this disease works, being trauma informed, I think is really, really important. The majority of people who end up in addiction have some sort of trauma. Most of us have some sort of trauma, but being trauma informed as a community member, I think can really help. That's one of the things that can really help get rid of stigma, so that people aren't feeling judged when they're reaching out for help. And like Lauren said, being available to your community members, to your family members, and getting education about what's going on in your community, who needs help in your community, and what you're able to do to help them, such as attending things like this. I know there's resources in our community that people have the ability to access, and a lot of times people don't know that they're there. As a peer, Google becomes like your first best friend, because you want to make sure, well, I've used a lot of the resources in the community, but for a lot of people who haven't used a lot of the resources, just looking for them, and having it available, so that if you do come across someone like in your family or something, if they do ask, for resources, so that you know who to point them to, even if you don't know exactly, what to do, knowing who to point someone to that can give them answers can be extremely helpful.
I love that you are talking about accessing different resources in the community. I think one of the most important ways that we can help is being able to say, I don't know how to help with this right now, or I don't know the answer to that, but I will do my best to find out, or contact someone who does know. I think that's huge in this work. So I have one final question, and then we'll see if we got any questions in the chat, but I'll let each of you interpret this as you want. But my question is, what do you think is most important when addressing the opioid epidemic?
So I would definitely say overcoming the stigma. And it's more than just the stigma of addiction. It's also the stigma of medication-assisted treatment. Again, if we look at this as a disease like any other disease, things like heart disease and diabetes, folks have to take medication. And so with this disease, folks need to take medication. But what we see often in our community is that individuals who are on methadone, Suboxone, Vivitrol, feel that they are stigmatized when they go to meetings like NAA, any of those types of support group meetings. They don't feel welcomed because there is this notion that you're not fully clean if you are on medication. And I think we need to overcome that, because a lot of individuals are finding recovery by being on these medications, and some of them are having to stay on them for a very long period of time. You know, I'll never forget the only overdose death that we had back in 2012 was the son of a medical professional in our communities. And she said to me about a year and a half after his death, she said, "Lauren, you know, he used to be on Suboxone and I wasn't in favor of it. And so he got off of Suboxone." And she said, "If he could be on Suboxone now and be alive and be on it for the rest of his life, I would take that." And that hit me, you know, that she wishes that she had not stigmatized medication-assisted treatment. And I think that, you know, often it is individuals in recovery, right? Jimeca can probably attest to this, that stigmatize folks who are on medication-assisted treatment. So I think if we are going to continue to fight this epidemic of addiction, right? It's not just one drug, it is the addiction epidemic, that we really need to overcome that stigma of addiction.
I agree with Lauren. I think overcoming the stigma is huge. And also, Jimeca referenced being more trauma informed earlier, along with getting to the reasons why. We really need to drill down to why misuse happens and start addressing those reasons. It's not just, we can't just be focused on a specific substance. We definitely need to focus our efforts on addiction as a whole, and really drilling down to why this is happening, and then destigmatizing all of it. You know, make it okay to talk about all of it. It's happening in our homes and in our families. In every home, in every family, somebody is touched by it. Make it okay for the kids to talk about it. Make it okay for, you know, their parents to talk about it. Don't be ashamed of any of it, because it is a disease that we are dealing with, and a disease we should not be ashamed of. And really just continue to talk and address, you know, why are these things happening? Why is the misuse happening? And then how can we build systems and get help, get more treatment, get, you know, everybody what they need to ensure that this is not going to happen in our community.
I feel that the most important thing when addressing the opioid epidemic is hope. Without hope, there's no motivation to move forward. For the families of people who are living with someone who's in addiction, or living with having lost someone to addiction, for people who are themselves living in addiction, they need hope that there can be something better. that life can be better, or that it cannot be so hard. And, you know, I feel like that's why peer support is so effective, because we're visual representations. You can see, we're the hope that people recover. They do recover every day. And giving people hope that that's possible, reminding them that the hope is there, that that's possible, I think is probably like the core. I feel it's the core of addressing this opioid epidemic.
I love that, Jimeca. I was just going to add one thing. You know, when we talk about the stigma, throughout this pandemic, I've been receiving a number of calls from parents asking for resources for their children to get them into treatment. And we know that typically insurance will pay for 28-day inpatient treatment stay, right? But when I'm getting these calls, one dad recently asked me, he said, so if my son goes away for 28 days to this treatment program, will it fix him? And I was just sort of stuck in the moment and had a conversation and had to educate him about addiction. And we have seen so many individuals during the COVID-19 pandemic who have relapsed, who have been in recovery for a very long period of time. And so when we think about stigma, we also have to realize that there is no magic wand and nothing is going to fix anyone. And sometimes, just like any other disease, folks are going to need to go back into treatment because something in their life changes. With COVID-19, so many individuals have lost their jobs. They've lost their income. They're no longer able to provide for their families. That could be a trigger for someone. That could cause a stressor. Circumstances change, just like in anyone's life. So we can't put this stigma on individuals who are living with addiction that they can't go through, take life, right, on life's terms, Jimeca, and go through things and just be expected to just be okay, right? Sometimes it's okay to go back into treatment and to need to go back and address whatever is bothering you in that moment or whatever trigger has come up. So I just think that that's an important point to make.
That's perfect. And it just made me think of something else, that, you know, reminding people who are living in addiction that this is not something they can do alone. It's very, very extremely rare to hear of someone who overcame addiction and never relapsed and did it all on their own. I personally never heard of anyone who just did it all on their own. I'm sure there is someone, they're an exception to the rule. So helping people to build a support network, helping families to build a support network, whether it's compromised of professional supports, natural supports, a combination is usually best in these types of situations. But, you know, I think that's part of reducing the stigma, because we think we have to be strong, and, you know, it makes us feel less than if we can't figure it out on our own and overcome it on our own. But this isn't something that you overcome on your own. I still have a large support network. I'm 5 years in my recovery, and I still check in with my people and make sure that I'm held accountable. And that's how I've gotten as far as I have, not on my own. And, you know, I still use my support. And so I think making sure that people know that this is not something that you do on your own, making sure that the people who are supporting are supported also. It takes a community.
I love that. I love that. Our final closing thought, it takes a community. And that's what we have here on this call. And I'm so grateful, Lauren, Megan, and Jimeca, for your time and for your perspective. This has been really wonderful. And I want to thank those who attended. We had a small group today, but I think that might be because some counties are going back to school, and I'm sure there are a lot of people trying to navigate that new norm today. But we do have a recording of this, and it will go out to our participants in an email. We'll also have a survey in that email that just helps us to plan for future webinars and things at the department puts together. So please fill out that survey when it comes to you. When we email you the survey and the recording, we will also email information from each of our panelists' organizations so that you can connect and keep up with the work that they're doing in their communities, in our community. We also have a newsletter where we share all of the events and resources that are happening in the community. So that's a good way to keep up to date with what we've got going on and with what our peers and colleagues have going on. So I just sent that in the chat. And of course we have social media. We are Lord Fairfax YRA on all of our platforms. And I think that's it. Thank you all for being here, our panelists and our guests. Yeah, that's all we've got.